Crisis in paradise. Politicians and judges arrested in the Maldives after a court orders political dissidents be let free. I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the archipelago's state of emergency. It was a shock decision that could have paved the way for the return of former President Mohammed Nasheed. The Maldivian Supreme Court ruled to drop terrorism charges against the opposition leader. For Nasheed, it meant an opportunity to end his self-imposed exile and contest upcoming elections. Then another shock announcement when the court ordered the release of a number of other dissidents. But current leader Abdullah Yameen would have none of it. A 15-day state of emergency was declared. The Supreme Court's Chief Justice and another judge were arrested and the rulings were overturned. The opposition is now calling for foreign intervention. But will it come? That debate in a moment, but first here's Shoaib Hassan.
A popular holiday destination of calm beaches and blue lagoons has just stormed into international headlines with a political crisis. On Monday, the Maldives President Abdullah Yameen declared a 15-day state of emergency. He also had top judges arrested for revoking terrorism charges against his opponents.
Clearly, the president is using military force to intimidate the court, and now we're in a situation where who knows how it's going to play out.
It wasn't long before potential rivals were also detained.
Right now, police are here to arrest me. I remain steadfast in my resolve. I don't know what charges they have against me. I have not done anything to be arrested. I urge you to remain steadfast in your resolve too.
While other opponents, like former president and currently exiled main opposition leader Mohammed Nasheed, immediately called for their release and international intervention. The Maldives has faced bouts of political uncertainty since becoming independent from British rule in 1965. Its longest-ruling president, Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, survived 3 coup attempts. The last one in 1988 was stopped only thanks to intervention from the Indian Armed Forces. Gayoom's rule ended in 2008 after he lost to the now exiled Nasheed in what's seen as the country's first free election. Nasheed's first move after assuming office was to increase civil liberties and improve social services. But he had inherited a heavy debt and met civil unrest by Gayoom's supporters. And a revolt in 2012 by the police and army forced Nasheed to resign. He was later arrested and convicted on now overturned charges. The former leader managed to win the next election in 2013, only to see the result annulled by the Supreme Court. The next round brought the current president to power. Yameen's term has seen the country turn to China for aid and away from its traditional allies. It's also seen the suppression of civil rights and dissent, with the current president moving to consolidate his power. Will he succeed? Or will the international community step in to try and prevent the country from becoming an autocracy? Shoaib Hassan, the newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Maldives' capital, Malé, by Hisan Hussain. She's former President Mohammed Nasheed's legal counsel and was once the legal affairs secretary in the Maldives government. And in neighboring Sri Lanka, we have Omar Waraich in Colombo. He's Amnesty International's Deputy Director for South Asia. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Lots to talk about. Hisan Hussain, let me begin with you. When we look at what Abdullah Yameen did it take you by surprise at all?
It was half expected. We expected the president to do the worst in a situation in which he loses control. But we did not expect him to declare emergency, a state of emergency unconstitutionally, and detain the Chief Justice of the Maldives and hold him under an illegal arrest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Hisan, his argument is that the Supreme Court was hasty in making its decisions. It was gambling a little bit. and that what he's doing right now is essentially coup prevention. He's safeguarding the country. Tell me why you disagree with that.
The Constitution is very clear. You can declare state of emergency only when the sovereignty of the country is at stake. When, for example, if he believes that there is a threat for national security and that the definition of the national security falls within the definition envisaged in the Constitution, only in such a circumstances President Jammeh can declare a state of emergency. The reason he has given when declaring state of emergency in this instance is that he was not able to make the Chief Justice and other justices of the Supreme Court answerable to a decision they made, to a judgment, to a court order.
Mm-hmm.
To begin with, it is unconstitutional for a president to demand answers from the Supreme Court justices and demand justifications and make them answerable for a decision they made. Secondly, in declaring this emergency or state of emergency, he had violated the Constitution in the sense, even in a situation in which a state of emergency is called for, he can only suspend certain fundamental rights guaranteed in our Constitution. He cannot suspend powers and functions of the judiciary or the parliament,
Understood.
even in a situation of emergency.
Okay, so you feel he's extending...
The declaration itself was unconstitutional.
Right. You feel he's even extending those state of emergency powers. We would have loved to have had a supporter of the president on the program. We tried very hard. Unfortunately, we couldn't get anybody. They turned us down. Omar Waraish, tell me about Amnesty's position here. The president feels this is necessary. Does Amnesty agree that it might be justified in any way?
There are conditions where a state of emergency can be justified. However, in this case, what we're seeing is a reaction to the 1st of February Supreme Court order. This is a case where the president has decided that there was a verdict he did not like and has now sought to reverse it. The Supreme Court clearly said that the convictions of those people did not meet fair trial standards, and we've examined some of those cases ourselves, whether it was former President Mohammed Nasheed or Colonel Nazim or Faris Mamoon, and found concerns about fair trial. So in those cases, we believe that the Supreme Court did the right thing. However, what President Yameen has done actually reminds me, Imran, of General Musharraf in 2007. It's quite funny you've got Nawaz Sharif on the screen there, because what General Musharraf did was he feared the Supreme Court would take action that would challenge his presidency. He imposed a state of emergency, sacked the Supreme Court judges, and threw the opposition behind bars. We're seeing the same thing happen here.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison that you make there. Hissan Hussain, I want to call up a tweet from Mohammed Nasheed, your client and your ally. He said, on behalf of the Maldivian people, we request India to send an envoy to release the judges and political detainees, including President Gayoom. He also goes on to ask the US to stop all financial transactions with the Maldives. Is that wise, Hissan? Because if I'm the president, I say, look, he's appealing to foreign powers now. We're a sovereign country. This guy wants foreign powers to come in and help him. That's not going to help, is it?
We need closer and firmer international support and intervention to minimize the losses the Maldivian people might face if this state of emergency would continue. Our people have been suppressed. We are demonstrating as much as we can on the street, given the situation of a very heavy military and police presence. But there is a sense that international community must help, and our people are expecting the international community to take a firmer action.
Okay, so let me ask that question in a different way then. Why would India be interested in trying to get involved here and get its hands dirty in the internal politics of the Maldives?
This is no longer internal politics of Maldives. alone. We are talking about the security of the entire Indian Ocean. We have heavy presence, Chinese presence, and given the threats the Chinese is making at the moment, and the problem of raising religious extremism in Maldives, India, I think, as the biggest superpower or in this region, must help Maldives.
Right.
For
Okay,
security
so
purposes.
let me ask Umar Waresh, are we seeing Maldives being caught in a tussle here? Because we saw China warning against any intervention. Is the president with China? Is the opposition maybe aligned to the Indians or trying to be aligned with the Indians? Are we going to see Maldives in the middle of a sort of geopolitical tussle here?
Well, President Yameen is closely aligned with China and with Saudi Arabia. Those are the alliances he's made. And we see the opposition trying to counter them by balancing the Maldives, by trying to get India involved. And this call for intervention from former President Nasheed reinforces that. Both of those countries, as far as I'm concerned, have very questionable human rights records. I would personally like to see countries focus on improving human rights in their own countries, and that actually includes, in the case of both China and in India, of respecting people's freedom of religion, but also for them to promote human rights in other parts of the world, including the Maldives. I think what we need to see is more unified voices expressing concern for the human rights situation in the Maldives, rather than the Maldives. What I worry about is the rights of the Maldives becoming a casualty in a geopolitical crossfire that takes place in the Indian Ocean.
Right. Hissan, is there a way to compromise? What could Abdullah Yameen do in order to get your side to say, okay, let's talk and find a solution to this?
We need assistance from the international community, even if we are to go to a table and sit down and discuss with the government. International community's engagement with India to find a solution is something that needs to be done immediately. And we have a situation in which the security forces actually broke into the Supreme Court of the Maldives and literally dragged the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the Maldives, Chief Justice of the Maldives, dragged him out of the court, and he is still being held unconstitutionally, illegally in detention.
Yeah. Omar Waresh.
In addition,
Sir, okay, please finish your point. Sorry, yes.
We also have a justice. We also have another justice of Supreme Court in prison. We have a former president, President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, in prison, and we have other political prisoners still in prison despite Supreme Court's order to release them. So we need to find a solution for the political crisis Maldives is in at the moment. And
certainly.
Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's something that can be resolved by just discussion with President Gayoom, President Yameen Abdul Gayoom and the opposition by ourselves.
So, Omar, as we look forward now, there's still plans for an election later in the year. Given that, as was mentioned, the Supreme Court was blockaded, the justices were detained, Abdullah Yameen has made his move or made his moves. Is it the opinion of Amnesty International that the Maldives can still have a free, fair, democratic election later this year?
Well, as a human rights organization, we don't take a position on elections or on the character of governments, but we would like to see all people being able to exercise their rights freely. It is very clear that right now, under the emergency, we're not seeing that. There's serious questions about the independence of the judiciary after the assault that you mentioned. There's serious questions about the fate of the members of the opposition, since they've been arbitrarily detained in defiance of a Supreme Court order. There's serious questions about the freedom of journalists who have not been allowed to report or carry out their work freely and without fear, as should have been the case. There's serious questions about rights such as people's rights, freedom of assembly, which we see has been curtailed in these circumstances. So as far as we're concerned, this is a wave of repression that continues to wash over the Maldives.
Hassan Hussein, would you compete in those elections?
MDP would compete in the elections, and what we are saying is that President Nasheed and all other opposition leaders are no longer under a conviction as per the Supreme Court order brought out on February 1st. As an order brought out by 5 justices of the Supreme Court cannot be reversed by 3 Supreme Court justices under the situation, under the circumstances in which we have the Chief Justice and 1 more Justice of the Supreme Court under detention, and the country in a state of emergency. So clearly, President Nasheed and other opposition leaders are not under conviction, and we are very determined. MDP is very determined that President Nasheed would contest these elections, and we will win this election. But
certainly,
we are doubtful that President Jammeh would accept the election results if he gets defeated.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because that was the accusation beforehand. Let me ask you if you would accept the elections going ahead if, for example, the state of emergency is still in force by then. I mean, if it gets renewed and he still wields the current executive powers that he currently has at that particular time. Would you feel it's free and fair and it's still open for competition?
The elections would be sometime in August, October, and we hope that this situation would not continue to be so by then. We are calling for the assistance of the international community for this very reason. Every time President Jammeh loses an election, he cannot simply accept the courts of the Maldives, the judiciary, to overturn the results of those elections and hand him the election results as how he wants it. It has to be decided by the people, and it has to be a free and fair election.
Omar Waresh, if there is criticism from the international community to pressure President Jammeh over human rights and the political culture in the country, is he going to listen if he has the backing of the Chinese financially and politically?
It's a very good question, Imran, and unfortunately we haven't seen any indications. One would hope that people would listen to, or just protect and respect the rights of their own people because they are people. That should be enough in these cases. I mean, what I would say, if anyone from the government of the Maldives is listening, as Amnesty International, we've covered waves of political repression in many countries around the world for many decades. And they never end well, and they certainly never end well for the people presiding over them. Ultimately, people will rise to demand their rights, and the sooner the government changes course, the better for the Maldives.
Yeah, and of course, big questions over tourism. The tourism industry worth billions of dollars every year. People having loads of questions about, will people continue to visit the Maldives if it continues to be in political crisis? We will uncover that a little bit later on, perhaps on the Newsmakers. But for now, we're out of time. Hassan Hussein and Omar Waresh, I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still ahead on the Newsmakers, why Israel is accusing the Polish government of denying facts about the Holocaust. And is China grabbing land in Sri Lanka? Our special series continues with a look at the tension over Beijing's growing investment. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. More than 5 million Polish citizens were killed during the Holocaust. And now, claiming that any Pole was complicit in those killings could land you in jail for up to 3 years. The Polish government has passed a law banning such comments. And that's drawn the ire of Israel, the US, and several Polish academics. Critics say it's not just an attack on free speech, but a cheap ploy by the ruling Law and Justice Party to stir up nationalistic sentiment. I'll put those accusations to one of the party's MPs in just a moment. But first, here's Christine Perovalakis.
Poland is trying to lay its ghost from the Holocaust to rest. President Andrzej Duda has signed a law making it illegal to blame the Polish nation for the Nazi Holocaust of World War II that took place on its soil. The bill sets fines or a maximum 3-year jail term for anyone who refers to Nazi German death camps as Polish, or accuses Poland of complicity in the crimes of the Third Reich. Poland says such terms suggest Warsaw was partly responsible for camps such as Auschwitz and Treblinka, where millions of Jews were killed. Poland's ruling right-wing Law and Justice Party says the bill is needed to protect Poland's reputation and ensure historians recognize that Poles also perished under the Nazis. Thousands took to the streets of Warsaw to support the bill. But it threatens to derail relations with Israel, which accuses Poland of trying to change history.
The truth is that many nations, including Poles, many Poles were engaged in helping the Nazis murder Jews, in handing them over to the Nazi authorities, and in murdering Jews themselves.
The United States says the law could undermine free speech and inhibit discussion of the Holocaust. The Polish government disagrees, and as a gesture to Israel, has promised to send the measure to the Constitutional Court to determine whether it conforms with laws on freedom of speech, but only after the law goes into effect.
We condemn all the crimes of World War II committed on Polish soil, regardless of the nationality of their perpetrators and to which nation the victims belonged. We will never limit the debate about the Holocaust. We owe it to all who have experienced it.
We're going to be strong. I don't believe it that I'm here. I believe it, I'm strong, you know.
Auschwitz was the largest of the Nazi death camps. Its name is closely associated with the misery and terror of the Holocaust, and also with Poland, where the horrors of Auschwitz took place. Nazis built the camps after they invaded Poland in 1939. At the time, the country was home to Europe's largest Jewish community, around 3.2 million people. 3 million died at the hands of the Nazis, but they also killed nearly 2 million non-Jewish Poles. Poland's role in the atrocities has always been a sensitive one. While thousands of Poles risked their lives to protect and hide Jews, there's evidence some Poles did participate in the killings, such as the massacre at Jedwabne in 1941, where an estimated 1,600 Jews were murdered by their Polish neighbors. It's that haunting legacy which now troubles Poland. But is passing a Holocaust law wading into perilous territory of censoring free speech and outlawing memories of the past? Christine Perovalakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, let's go to Warsaw and speak to Polish MP Dominik Tarczynski of the ruling Law and Justice Party. And from Washington, D.C., we have Shai Franklin. He's the former director of the World Jewish Congress and has consulted for several European governments on how to combat anti-Semitism. Gentlemen, I'm looking forward to this discussion. Let me begin with you, Dominik. Why is this so important to the Polish government right now, where you can't accuse Poland of atrocities during World War II? Why is this a priority for your government?
It's not about government. It's about Polish pride, history, and the truth. It's about Polish nation. It's about me as a grandson of this Polish soldier who fought against Nazis, against Germany, against Soviets. So this is very important to me, and there is no even one family in Poland which was not affected by the Second World War. So every member of the Polish government, everyone in Poland should be interested to fight for the truth. And this is the step which should be taken long time ago. So if someone is trying to tell me that me as a grandson of the soldier who fought against Germany, not fascists, not Nazis, Germany, is responsible for the Holocaust, and Poland is responsible and cooperated in the institutional way with Germany, I cannot let that happen. I cannot let anyone say that because it's not true. Okay. Official data is absolutely clear. Polish people were killed. 6 million. Your data is not very specific. 6 million people, Polish people, were killed. 3 million of them were Polish Jews, Polish citizens. Right. So our bill, our act, is in the memory of Jewish citizens, Jewish Polish citizens as well.
Okay, but Dominic, some of them were not killed directly by Nazi soldiers. Some of those people, Polish citizens, were killed by fellow Polish citizens. So when people debate this, would you accept that they're not necessarily blaming...
as well.
Certainly, but they're not necessarily blaming the Polish government, but they're saying Poles were complicit in atrocities during World War II. This is just fact. This is just history. Why are you shutting down any free speech about this?
No. We're not shutting the free speech. If someone is trying to blame Poland as a nation and Poland as an institutional cooperator with Germany, it's not true. We were fighting against them. Obviously, there were some Poles who committed crimes, and we're condemning this. And there were some Jews, Polish Jews, who killed Jews. That's history, and that's a fact as well. Okay. So everywhere, when these terrible wars are taking place, this kind of horrible behavior happened, but the nation cannot be blamed. Okay, so let's get Shai Franklin's response to this. Does that make sense to you? The man's saying, why is the criticism or maybe revisiting the history and looking at the atrocities that some individual Poles might have been involved in, why is that being conflated with Poland as a nation being involved in the Holocaust? That's why they feel this is so important as a matter of national pride. Do you accept that argument, Shai?
I don't accept the premise, because the view that Poland as a nation was complicit with the Nazis is a marginal view. It's discredited by most historians. Criminalizing the discussion about who was involved and at what level, it really puts a stain on what could be a very proud chapter of Polish resistance in Poland's history. You cannot legislate pride. We're having a debate here in the United States, in fact, about are we proud to be Americans, and what does that mean? And should there be laws, and should there be new libel laws against the press for making criticism or revealing facts about the president or other politicians? And there's a vigorous debate. And we can have a vigorous debate, and we can have thoughtful discussion. There's a thriving Jewish community now in Poland, and what was a huge Jewish community is now small, but it's a thriving community. There's rich cultural heritage. There's a history of collaboration among the cultures in Poland. This seems to shut it down, and it fits into a broader framework of great concern to many here in the United States and to many Jews, including in Poland, which is the shutdown of civil society, or I should say crackdown on civil society. In fact, the president now has signed the bill and referred it over to the Constitutional Tribunal, which has conveniently now been placed under his government and under the parliament. So the separation of powers is a concern. To have this law come now and to come the day before the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I think it shuts down debate, and it's very unfortunate.
Okay, so criminalizing this and the fact that you could spend up to 3 years in jail for this is what Shai is against. Dominic, doesn't the man have a point?
Okay, so the question is, I'd like to ask you, can we say that American Jews are responsible for Holocaust because they did not react for the reports from Poland about what's happening with their followers, with the Jews in Poland? Jan Karski, who was trying to convince and react, who prepared the report. Can we say that the American Jews are responsible for the Holocaust? Of course not. We cannot say that the nation is responsible. Again, this bill is penalizing someone who's blaming the whole nation. And then I'd like to speak to you about the specific data, not about historian opinions, but about data. Number one, collaborators with Waffen-SS, with the Germans. Belgium, 40,000 members. France, 20,000 members. Holland, 50,000 members. Estonia, Finland, Serbia, Italy, 15,000. Ukraine, 25,000. Poland, 0. And this is official data. This is not some kind of opinion or the book. Poland was the only nation when there was no collaborators with the fascists. And if you had some criminals who killed a neighbor, as you have right now, you cannot blame the whole nation.
So again,
this bill
you've made a good argument.
Protect
but again,
the
you made
Jews' history and remembrance.
You made a really good argument.
Which were killed in Poland.
You've made a really good argument, Dominic, for why you shouldn't even have the law. Because if there were no collaborators and those other countries have had far more collaborators, why do you even have to make such a fuss over this to draw attention to yourselves?
Because we are called now in many discussions fascists, collaborators. We are blamed for the Polish death camps. There was no Polish death camps.
That's a good point.
There was no
Polish
good point,
Dominic.
Death camps.
Dominic.
Shevak Weiss was very clear about it.
Okay, bear with me for a second.
There was no Polish death camps.
Good point.
Remember, German death camps.
Let me strengthen your own argument and pose it to Shai. And I'm glad you mentioned Jan Karski, because former US President Barack Obama, when he was honoring Karski, he mentioned the Polish government and he upset the Polish government. Here's what he had to say. Have a listen.
The Jews were being murdered on a massive scale and smuggled them into the Warsaw Ghetto and a Polish death camp to see for himself.
So Shai, it's that particular phrase, Polish death camp. That's the thing that grates with Dominic, with so many others. Obama made a mistake, right? And I guess, to be fair to these guys, this is what they're trying to prevent. They're saying, don't say Polish death camp because it wasn't authorized by the state.
I think President Obama, it was a mistake. I certainly would have tried to correct it, but it was a semantic mistake. It was a semantic misunderstanding. I'm positive that President Obama meant death camps in Poland. And the way the adjectives work and the way the adjectives translate into Polish might even make it seem more severe.
To say, and
but
he should
again,
say that
I'm not
German death camps.
Excuse me.
And this
excuse
is
me.
the point.
Did I interrupt you, sir? Sir, did I? Is my time over? Can I not speak?
Go ahead, Shai.
Can I speak? Can I complete a thought? Would that be okay?
Sure. Sure.
Have I been disrespectful?
Go ahead, Shai. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, I'm not contesting. I'm not claiming. I'm not here to argue over the history of Polish collaboration, which didn't exist as a nation. It certainly didn't exist. And most historians don't say that either. So this seems like a pretext to crack down on free speech in Poland. And in fact, what's interesting is the opposition, when there's been opposition to this law, the reaction from the Law and Justice Party and from people to the right of it, some of them, has been to blame Jews. Now, in terms of Jan Karski and the American Jewish community, as an organized community during World War II, in fact, there are many Jews and many in the organized community, and many historians today, and many Jewish leaders, and many Israeli leaders, who do blame American Jewish leadership for not doing enough during World War II, for not listening to Karski, for not helping more, and for not going up against President Roosevelt. And we don't criminalize that in Israel or here. It's part of learning, it's part of growing, it's part of being a free society.
Okay, so Dominic, let me add something on to what Shai said. And this is going to irritate you, Dominic. I'm going to warn you now. I know you're going to say this is marginal, but it was widely reported. Monday evening, a small group of far-right advocates demonstrating in front of the presidential palace, demanding that Duda, this was last week, Duda sign the law. They had a banner. The banner said, "Take off your yarmulke, sign the bill," right? So let me add that to what Shai said. Is this all for domestic purposes, to whip up nationalistic, xenophobic sentiment, to kind of carry on that nationalistic wave? Does it have nothing to do with World War II and more about ramping up the right wing in Poland?
They should be jailed. That's what I think. If I would have authority and power, I would jail them. That's number one. Number two, do we have a freedom of speech which you care about and you are worried about, or we don't have a freedom of speech? That's number two, because you are mentioning a banner which, in my opinion, was prepared by someone who tried to work on internal politics in Poland. To me, it's sabotage. But those who stood there with this banner should be jailed, because I love Jews. I do love the history of Jews. I'm a Roman Catholic. The Old Testament, for me, it's a holy Bible. It's a holy book. I love the history of the Jewish nation. And my grandpa fought for the Jews to help them. Not only Karski, thousands of people tried to help. Over 120,000 Jews were saved by Polish. This is official data. What about Pilecki, the one who ran away from Auschwitz, prepared the report to fight for the Jews, to save them? No one helped him.
Right.
We have a huge examples when Poles were saving Jews. That's why I'm so, forgive me my behavior, but this is very emotional to me, because my family, because of help from my grandpa for 3 generations, were called Jews' friends. My family was called in many bad ways. And when I was young in school, I was called in this way as well. So I cannot let someone tell me, as I said, a grandson of those who fought for the Polish and for the Jews, to be responsible as a nation for the Holocaust.
Okay.
So everyone is open to work on a historian book. Scientists are open, and there is no limitation of free speech. And if you think that there is, show me the article, specific part of the bill, which says that it will limit the freedom of speech. It's just not true.
Well, no, I mean, again, if somebody goes out, as you say, you said that those guys should be jailed. They were not jailed, right? And you're saying that there's no limits on free speech. Well, the bill seems to be absolutely clear. If you say that there was Polish, if Poland was complicit in World War II killings of Jews, particularly in the Holocaust, you can go to jail for 3 years. So how come there was free speech for those people who are saying, take off your yarmulke, Mr. President, but there's no free speech for somebody who might question Poland's role in the Holocaust?
Again, I think they should be jailed. It has nothing to do with the bill, and this is hate speech, in my opinion. That's number one. Number two, the question is, did we have Jews killing Jews in Poland during the Second World War? Yes or no?
Sure you did. Sure you did.
Of course. And no one don't even think to call Israel responsible for the Holocaust. It's ridiculous. So we feel the same way. 3 million Poles and 3 million Polish citizens, Jews, were killed. We both fight it. And what? We can be called now actually fascists, responsible as a nation, as institutional way of cooperation.
Let me ask Shai.
Fascist and responsible.
Let me ask
and
Shai.
Israel is not. Of course, both are innocent.
So you made an interesting point. Let me ask Shai if you think that comparison is disingenuous. There were some individual Jews who were involved in the killing of other Jews in the Holocaust. He's saying criticizing Poland for being involved in the Holocaust is the same as criticizing Israel for being involved in the Holocaust because certain Jews were involved. Is that a disingenuous point as an analogy, or is there some truth to it?
I think it makes no sense. I mean, Israel was not founded by the people who were many. Look, 3 million Polish Jews died, and if 1 million or 2 million or more Poles died in the war, there were still 35 million Poles. There were 300,000 Polish Jews left at the end of the war. There's no comparison. And the instances of where Jews might have actually killed Jews are so few. But I'm not here to argue the history.
Right.
You talk about fascists. I'm not calling you a fascist because I'm not calling anyone a fascist because of what Poland might or might not have done in World War II. I think that history has been settled, and there's no reason for me to argue against that. But what many people in the United States and in Israel and elsewhere are worried about is a rising, I wouldn't say fascism, but a rising right-wing extremism in Poland and in Hungary and in other countries, and this tension within the European Union and the maybe not so much in Poland, but in other countries, the resistance against immigrants and against refugees, that really frightens Jews, and it frightens the people here in the United States who want to see Poland continue on the path that it's taken. Solidarity. If your grandfather's story deserves to be shared, but it can't be heard right now because this law, which you do have something to do with, it's your party, and you're defending it now. You do have something to do with this law, and it does criminalize speech, a certain kind of speech. So nobody can hear your story, your wonderful, beautiful story, the story of Poland today.
the culture, the heritage, the vibrant society.
You both made very emotional pleas to each other. Dominic, I'm going to give you the final word here because we're completely out of time. I'm going to go over by a little bit because I need you to respond. Dominic, final answer, please respond.
Thank you very much that you mentioned immigrants, European Union, right-wing. It's all about politics. You made the point. Democracy is the way we're celebrating freedom. And people, the nation, elected our government with such a huge numbers that we don't need coalition. Our people, our nation is against illegal immigration. And I'm very happy that you mentioned politics, because all of this is politics. The final word is we love and respect Israel. We fought for you. We fought for all who died. And let me tell you, it was 6 million Polish citizens, not a million or two Poles, which you mentioned. 3 million Poles and 3 million Jews, which were Polish citizens. Remember that.
Okay, Dominic Tarczycki and Shai Franklin. This was an important discussion to have, and I'm really glad to have you both on the program. Thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. It was $1 billion investment that India wanted no part of. Sri Lanka, desperate to rebuild after a massive tsunami in 2004, asked New Delhi for funds to develop its southern port. The Indians balked, and the Chinese saw an opportunity. Today, the port itself remains mostly unused, but the cost of the project ballooned, and so too did Sri Lanka's debt to one of India's biggest rivals. We begin our next installment of our Sri Lanka series in the town of Hambantota. Natalie Pahonen reports.
Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was once known, has a rich heritage as a trading hub on the ancient spice route. The art of buying and selling and even bartering has long been practiced here. A short drive from the main marketplace in Hambantota is its port, which now connects the island to what China is calling the modern Silk Road. The Chinese government is investing in major infrastructure projects like the Hambantota port to create trade networks as part of its Belt and Road initiative. The port was built with Chinese funds under previous President Mahinda Rajapaksa. But it's failed to attract enough ships to make it a commercial success, and a sign that perhaps the cost of being part of the new Silk Road might not pay off for Sri Lanka. In December 2017, the port was leased to the state-run China Merchants Port Holdings for 99 years to help pay off more than $1 billion of debt Sri Lanka owes China. The Chinese now have a 70% stake. Namal Rajapaksa is the Member of Parliament for the district and son of the former president.
I personally, my father, our government always believe in a non-aligned policy. Our concern is about Sri Lanka and people of Sri Lanka. So when you get into an agreement or a transaction which gives another nation a total control of a commercial port and an airport, including the harbour master, it will give us serious national security issues.
The government says there is nothing to fear.
I don't see any reason why people should think, well, Sri Lanka is a colony of China or anything like that, because we are not. We have a commercial transaction with the Chinese, just like we would have commercial transactions with others. And I want to stress something here, and that is the whole notion of security. Whether Chinese military will be present in Hambantota and so on. So absolutely no military activity in Hambantota.
Along with the lease, there's an ambitious plan to create a 15,000-hectare estate around the port to encourage multinational businesses to the area. The government says the Hambantota industrial zone could generate up to 100,000 jobs and is part of its plan to turn Sri Lanka into an economic hub of the Indian Ocean. But it would also further bind the nation to Beijing, with the Chinese embassy here saying Chinese businesses are set to invest about $5 billion in the zone. Despite assurances from the government, many local people have interpreted it as a land grab and fear Sri Lanka could lose part of its sovereignty. They took to the road around the port to protest in January last year. 12 months on, and farmers like Dharmasena Hetiarachi from the nearby village of Medila are still angry about the possibility their land could be taken away.
I think we are going towards destruction as a nation. We were free and independent, but in the future, we'll probably be dependent and won't have freedom. We are already divided as Sinhalese, Tamils and Muslims. Our future generations will have to tackle another problem, as there'll be people who are foreign to us.
I meet Sandima Nirosha, who lives in another part of the village.
The port definitely is a big asset, but apart from that, these lands are fertile and ripe for rice paddy cultivation and many other crops too. Those are valuable assets and resources as well.
But she says the government and the Chinese investors aren't thinking about how their decisions are affecting locals.
They don't understand our heart, our sorrow, our pain, or how hard it'll be for us to detach ourselves from this place. Only we feel for what is ours, not them.
In the pursuit of global trade on the new Silk Road, it appears the lives of locals could be changed forever. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers, Hambantota.
Well, to get more on this, I'm joined now from Beijing by economic and political affairs commentator Einar Tangen. Good to have you on the program once again, Einar. So India didn't want any part of this. The Chinese stepped in. Was it the right decision from China?
Well, let's take a little bit of a history course here. Let's first start out that this was the brainchild of the previous prime minister, the one who is currently complaining about it. And this was his hometown, and this is something he wanted. He first turned to India. India wanted no part of it. And then he turned to China. The issue was it necessary? And if it is necessary, how will it pay off? And quite frankly, that has only can happen if it's part of this kind of string of pearls, part of a much larger Belt and Road initiative that China has envisioned. So it's a very, very difficult situation now because, it's built, but it is not productive, neither for the Chinese nor for Sri Lanka.
Yeah, and I think you're referring to the former leader Rajapaksa. Rajapaksa's son Namal, an MP for Hambantota district, spoke to us. We would have heard him in the report preceding this as well. One of the interesting points here saying that, we're honouring our side of the agreement and we wanted this, my father wanted this, we wanted this. But the important point made here, our concern has always been about Sri Lanka and the people of Sri Lanka. So when you get into an agreement or a transaction which gives another nation total control of a commercial port, it gives us serious national security issues. So is Sri Lanka's national security under threat because China runs that port?
No, I don't think so. I mean, let's look and contrast what's happening today with what happened during the 60s and 70s under the Marshall Plan. There you had the U.S. very aggressively pushing power plants, dams, nuclear, etc., as the key to developing these emerging and developing countries. They saddled them with very large debt, but at the same time, they brought in an ideological component. They said, it has to be on our terms. This is all towards building democracy and capitalism. Today, fast forward, China is doing something similar, but it's part of a cohesive plan. It is not coming into countries posing plans. They say, as we'd like to trade, we will help you build your infrastructure, and we will do it without any kind of ideological component. There's no radio-free China blasting into any zones, nor does the Chinese government try to get involved. So it's very different.
Sure, but there might not be strings attached.
The issue here is that Sri Lanka, if it is going to develop, has huge infrastructure holes.
And it needs that.
To date, China has put $15 billion in, whereas the IMF has only put $1 billion in since 1956.
Okay, and fair enough. So China has put in much more than everybody else. Nobody, I think, wanted to get involved and get their hands dirty, especially during this civil war, which ended about 10 years ago. So nobody wanted to get involved. China put in the money. But can you honestly tell me that you believe that China is following this model with no strings attached, is doing what the West did with no strings attached, but that there will not be a day when the Chinese say, hey, Sri Lanka, you owe us billions of dollars. We're going to call in a favor now. It's time to play ball, whether it's at the UN or whether it's regional. You're saying the Chinese want nothing to do with this at all?
Well, I don't think that's fair to say. I mean, you can look at the United States. Haley announced after the vote on Jerusalem that only those who vote with the U.S. will be considered for aid and will be considered friends. I don't think you've seen that hard line coming from China. Is it possible that it would come? Yes. But, I mean, I don't know how else you can do this. If you accept money and you want to go forward, there are always strings attached, whether it's a bank or a country or the IMF. The IMF would not be walking in there and saying we're plunking down $15 billion on a series of projects. You can just do as you please. If anything, I think that China have been a little bit too lax in enforcing the terms of their agreements. They took over the port not because it was intended, but because nothing was happening, and their collateral was basically just being underutilized and in danger of deteriorating. So they had really no choice but to take it over, and it was rather reluctant. They're not establishing military bases there at this time, so we'll have to wait and see rather than prejudge based on the actions of past large powers.
Yeah, Sri Lanka and Beijing not seen as natural allies, so it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. For now, Einar Tangen, I thank you very much for joining us here on The Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, reports say Israel has been dropping bombs over the Sinai for years, but Egypt denies it. We debate if this is a cover-up by a covert alliance. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.